Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zarov's Chess Channel, and welcome to the Clutch Chess International Tournament in 2020. The finals couldn't be better, I think. We're having Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana, the repetition of the World Championship match 2018. So it's really great to see again Magnus battling against Fabiano Caruana. I think we'll have some dynamic games. And I believe that Fabiano Caruana is motivated. He has played so far a great tournament, but he really needs this win in a match game, I think, against Magnus. He has to prove himself that he can actually beat Magnus in a match game, not maybe only in one game, but really in a match game of 12 matches or something else. And Magnus Carlsen, I think, is also motivated because he lost the semifinals against Hikaru Nakamura of the Lindoris Abbey Rapid Challenge. So this will be, I think, a motivated match game between the two top best players now these days. The first four games ended with two draws and one win for Fabiano and also one win for Magnus. Now we're in the game five, in which Magnus Carlsen had the white pieces, and the game five is the so-called clutch game, in which the win is evaluated 2 points. So let's check out now what happened. We have now e4 played by Magnus. We have e5 played by Fabiano. Knight to f3, knight to f6, the Petrov defense, and Magnus takes. He often plays this opening line, and now after d6 we have knight to f3, we have knight to e4, and after knight to c3, the Nimzovich variation of the Petrov defense. This idea is of course to challenge immediately black. If black retreats, that's not a good choice, I think, because black has already played many times with the same piece. So that's why here knight takes c3. We have d takes c3. It's one of the rare cases where you basically take away from the center when you trade off some pieces. Most of the times you see that we are trading towards the center. We're taking with the b pawn, but it's a common idea in the Petrov. We are trying now to build a very nice activity with our bishops, with bishop to d3, and these bishops would aim here against black's king. The problem for black sometimes in the Petrov defense can be that black is lacking of defenders here. When black castles, then black has only the bishop as a defender in front of the king, so it could be a problem if you don't react correctly. So bishop to e7, we have bishop to e3, castling, and now queen to d2, played by Magnus, and now comes a very nice move, I think, by Fabiano Caruana. Knight to d7. Okay, you can say it's nothing special, but I've seen now many times in the top grandmaster level that c6 and followed with d5 is played. I believe Levan Aronian played that also against Magnus Carlsen, lost the game with a brutal tactic by Magnus Carlsen. So here knight to d7 is of course the idea to play knight to f6 and still get another defender in front of the king, which is really a good idea, I think. We're not weakening the pawn structure here immediately with c6 moves and similar ideas. We are trying to get first more defenders in front of the king, because there is really this threat to play bishop to d3, maybe h4, knight to g5, and trying to opening the h file. So that's why knight to d7 perfectly fine. Queenside castling played by Magnus. So we have now this so-called opposite side attack game, in which white will try, of course, to coordinate the attack with some g5, g4, h4 moves. White will try to open the g file somehow and play against black's king. On the other hand, black will, of course, coordinate the attack on the queen side, maybe with c5, b4 moves, and similar ideas. So knight to f6, very nice defensive move, also liberating the light square diagonal for the bishop. We have bishop to d3, and now rook to e8. The idea also behind this move is maybe to play bishop to f8, the g6, bishop to g7, getting use of this diagonal. Sometimes it's also a possibility in the Petrov. We have rook to e1, and Magnus Carlsen has now finished his development. His rooks are on active files, all the pieces are developed, and Caruana played a very aggressive bishop to g4. So here bishop to g5 was played, and Caruana played queen to d7. If you take here the the knight on f3, then we can of course take with the pawn. G takes f3. I've analyzed also this particular line. I was wondering why Caruana didn't take. It seemed to me like a good idea, but it's really a bad idea. First of all, you're opening the g file. That could be a problem. And if you go maybe with knight to d7 in order maybe to trade off your bad bishop, because this bishop on e7 is a little bit blocked out by its own pawn here on d6. I think that white doesn't have to even take the bishop. We can simply retreat, continue the game with the bishop pair, aiming still against black's king. Play something like rook to g1, rook to g3, followed with rook to g1. Could be really dangerous. Then maybe even some f4, f5 moves, h4, h5 if the position allows it. So I think here white is simply faster in the attack. So that's why here queen to d7 was played, with another position idea here by Caruana to play the move bishop to f5, simplify the position and trade off this very active bishop here on d3. This bishop on d3 is a very active piece. Of course, it aims here against this dangerous h7 square, so there could be some tactics with bishop takes f6 and followed maybe with some Greek gift tactics with bishop takes h7, but that's really in long terms. It's of course not possible immediately, but as a tactical possibility, it's of course present. So here a3 play by Magnus. A better idea is maybe to play immediately king to b1, securing the king. a3 also sort of a waiting move. We are waiting what black will do. In the game, Caruana played on his idea, bishop to f5. We have a knight to d4, and now bishop takes d3. C takes d3 doesn't bring you so much because you're proving your pawn structure, but still you haven't gained anything with the move queen to d3. Magnus has accomplished that he has now an active queen, and we are controlling now this f5 square, which is very important. Then we could go something like queen to g3 and maybe attack also this g7 square. So in the game, knight to d5 was played, and now bishop takes e7, and here knight to e7. If you take with the rook, it could be a problem here for black, because we can simply take, I think, and if you take with the queen, then we can simply play knight to f5 with this idea to play queen to g3, still occupy the e file. So there is this problem here after rook to e7. We could also immediately play knight to f5. So in this, I think, particular line, black, I think, will simply lose the battle on the e file, which is very important because that's the only file that's open. So here, after knight to f5 or similar ideas, I think black could have some problems in order to activate this rook on a8. So that's why here knight takes e7 was played by Caruana, preventing, at least for a while, this idea to play for white to play the move knight to f5. So we have h4, knight to g6, and now h5. Again, it seems to me that white is simply slightly faster in this attack. We have a knight to e5 attacking the queen, and queen to g3. Now there is this threat, of course, to play h6, weakening further the pawn structure in front of the king. So that's why h6 played by Caruana himself, not allowing this idea of white. And now we have rook to e4 played by Magnus, and here we have now a very nice idea, rook to g4, attacking this very weak pawn on g7. So in the game, knight to c6 was played. We have rook to g4, and here knight takes d4 was played by Caruana. I think a better idea maybe is to play even the move f6, at least protecting everything for a while. But okay, in the game, Caruana tried knight takes d4, and after rook takes g7, we have now king to h8, and finally c takes d4. Okay, let's stop a little bit here. Magnus Carlsen has grabbed the pawn, but the problem is now that Magnus has lost the battle on the e file. So you cannot go both ways, of course, in chess. Now you have left your defense of this second rank also. So that's why it's really hard for white to win this game, even with the pawn up, because now black can activate his pieces. And here Caruana played a simple queen to f5, attacking the pawn on h5. We have f3. Played by Magnus, and now rook to e2. Very nice move by Caruana. Now the main idea is, of course, to double up rooks here on the e file and also cause some threats here on the second rank. So here Magnus has to, of course, cover, because there was also this checkmate threat on c2. Rook to d2 was played. Rook takes d2, king takes d2, and now rook to e8. And here I think the evaluation is really equal, although, as I said, white is a pawn up, but still this is playable for black, because the king is a little bit weird here on d1, d2, pardon me. It's still endangered by some attacks of blacks, and you cannot really find a way how to attack anymore black's king. it's of course cornered here, but it's still not so endangered because we have still this rook that is covering the 8th rank, and still the queen as a nice defensive piece. So in the game, rook to g4 played by Magnus. We have queen to a5 attacking the king, king to d1, and now queen to b5. Here Magnus played on a simplification idea, rook to e4. After rook takes e4, we have f takes e4, and now Caruana grabbed also pawn. So now this is really a drawish position in the game. Magnus tried queen to e3, attacking the pawn on h6, and Caruana, of course, protects this pawn. So the problem of white is, of course, maybe black's king is slightly more endangered than maybe white's king, but you cannot include any other piece, any other pawn. You cannot include the king in the attack, because if you start to march with your king, then of course you're vulnerable to your opponent's check. So that's why it's really a drawish position in the game. E5, Magnus tried to spice up the position, tried to really create some new dynamics in the game. We have queen to b5, we have queen to g3, and now king to h7. Queen to f3 with some queen to f5 check possibilities. But again, if you even manage to do this queen to f5, again, black can do some perpetuals with king to g7, king to h7. In the game, queen to c4 was played, and now comes queen to e4 played by Magnus, and again, king to g7. We have e takes d6, c takes d6, and now king to d2 played by Magnus. Here we have queen to b5, and now queen to f3. So we have to protect, of course, our h5 pawn. This h5 pawn plays a very important role, of course, in the attack. The king cannot escape here, maybe through the square g6. In the game, queen to g5 was played, and now king to c3. So the problem now for Caruana is that Caruana doesn't have any more checks. He should have proceeded maybe here with the move queen to a5 if he wants to do something. But here in the game, I think Caruana makes maybe his first mistake. He played the move d5, locking his queen. Now, as I said, no more checks are possible. You have really sort of a restricted area now in which you can attack white's king. I think now black's king is much more endangered. It's still vulnerable to white's attacks, and here Magnus cements this pawn on h5 with the move g4. We have now b6, and now king to b2, securing again the king. And the problem is now, I think, for Caruana, if you would love to go something like queen to f6, you would love to do that and maybe trade off the queens, but you see then your d5 pawn is hanging. So this d5 move was really a bad move by Caruana. After king to b2, here Caruana played king to f8, and now we have a4. And here now comes, I think, now the critical moment. After king to e7, Magnus played queen to e2, and now king to d6. And this was, again, I think, a new inaccuracy by Caruana. Caruana should have simply played king to f8 again, or king to f6, with possibility to simply escape with the king if the king gets too endangered. But Caruana makes really these mistakes. He goes with the king towards the center. Okay, in an endgame, you should play with your king towards the center, but not in these open positions. As I said, the problem, the queen is a little bit stuck here to the defense of these two pawns. You cannot create counterattacks. You have locked your queen. No checks are possible, and Magnus simply played a5. Even in this position, I think Caruana still doesn't need to take this pawn on a5. Still can go maybe on into some trading off ideas with queen to e7. Maybe try to do some perpetuals with the king. But he played now really a blunder again. He played b takes a5 and allows now Magnus Carlsen to go into a favorable endgame in which Magnus has now a check, and queen takes a7, a new check. King to f6, again, here Magnus takes another pawn. And the problem is now, if you take the pawn on g4, you lose simply your d5 pawn, and now if that happens, white will have two connected pass pawns, and they're basically uncatchable even for black's queen. The problem is when you face these two connected pass pawns, then white can always hide a little bit behind these pawns. Combined with the queen, this is a great defensive setup. The queen and two pawns around the king, then sometimes black cannot do some perpetuals. So that's why, as I said, Caruana made this two or three mistakes in the game. He tried now to escape with the king to g7, but now you see here comes the move c4. If you take d takes c4, you get a simply queen takes g5. Okay, you can take, but now after king to c3, we would create simply new pass pawn, or we can simply push. The problem is now that you have to face two pass pawns. We have one pass pawn on the d file, but also one on the h file. So the king cannot catch up with both of them. So it's game over here. So that's why Caruana didn't take the pawn, and he played simply queen takes g4, but Magnus plays queen takes d5. Of course, we have f5, and now queen to e5 with the check, king to f7, and now Magnus Carlsen simply pushes his pawn. We have f4, and here queen to d5, again another check, again some checks, and now after queen to g6, it's game over, because now Fabiano Caruana is forced to trade off the queens, because after king to h4, queen takes g4 was played, king takes g4, and the problem is now that the promotion of this pawn will happen on the square c8, which comes of course with the check on the king, and it's game over here for black, because after c6 we have f3, c7, and in this position Caruana resigned. So incredible stuff what happened, I think, in this top grandmaster level. This move d5 played by Caruana, this king moves towards the center, was simply too many mistakes here by Caruana. Magnus Carlsen, of course, uses these types of positions. He uses basically every inaccuracy by you. If you make really, even in such a drawish endgame, if you make a slightly inaccuracy, he will punish you, and that's why he's really sort of an endgame monster. I cannot believe what Caruana did here. He had really a great position. I think he went out of this opening very well with the drawish position with some perpetuals, but okay, we lost again eventually. Still, of course, nothing is lost. Still, Caruana has his chances. I wish him all of the best, but I also wish Magnus the best. I'm wishing, of course, always some great games. We'll see what will happen now in the next game, which is also played today after this one, and we'll have again tomorrow some other 6 games. The last 2 games, if you don't know, are worth even 3 points. So even if Caruana is maybe a couple of points behind, still he can catch up in these two clutch games and maybe turn things around and win this very nice final. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game, and meanwhile you can watch my other commented chess games from some other tournaments and also this one, and you can also watch my best chess games of all time if you want to see the best chess games that have been ever played in chess history. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.